Set in the heart of the Shropshire countryside, Blakemere is a stunning natural mere of around 9 acres. Shrouded by tall trees and lined with an abundance of lily pads, it really is a stunning venue and a place that I would consequently spend the next 5 years in search of some of its tricky inhabitants. I'd first fished the mere in the August of 2014 and amassed around 9 nights with just one small fish to show for my efforts. In all honesty, I never really felt close to a fish. Even the one I'd had felt like a complete fluke. They'd led me on a merry dance, and it was clear that I was going to have to spend a lot more time getting to grips with the lake, and with that in mind, I pulled off in the latter part of the year, vowing to return with a fresh outlook and to start my campaign again early the following year. Following a cold snap in early 2015, and with a lot of lakes up and down the country being frozen for quite some time, my first session was to be on the 21st of February. The mere hadn't done a fish for a good couple of weeks and hadn't long defrosted, but I was just keen to get out and start my campaign. With very little to go off and the temperatures dropping rapidly, I spread 3 singles across a wide area and turned in for the night. With nothing more than a couple of bleeps during the night, I awoke to a rather bare looking and lifeless mere. I got the kettle on to get some warmth back into my body before deciding to call it a day and trudge my way back to the car in the midst of another snowstorm. I'd faced everything that session: heavy snow, rain, hail and temperatures well into the minus figures, but the fire was well and truly lit and I was already planning my return. For the next month I kept a keen eye on the catch reports, but with very little coming out, it wasn't until Easter weekend that I returned. With some warmer weather forecast, I opted to fish a swim known as Heron's View, which was situated towards the shallower end of the mere and had also produced a fish during the week. Sure enough, with the rise in temperature, the odd fish began to wake from their winter slumber and show themselves. After spreading a kilo of boilies around an overhanging bush on the far margin, I returned to the swim and positioned 3 rigs around the baited area. No more than 45 minutes later, the left-hand rod arched round violently and was away. Following a long battle, a large, pale, scarred-up mirror lay in the bottom of the landing net. The fish turned out to be one of the 18, a fish known as Scar at £30.9, and was also my first 30. Scar was also a fish that I'd go on to meet again a few years down the line. Fueled by the success of the last trip, I returned to the mere just 2 weeks later. I'd taken the Friday off work to string together a 72-hour session and drop back into Heron's View. The weather had been warm all week, and with the pads now beginning to pop up in the shallower water, I knew where the fish were likely to be. Already knowing the spots from my previous session, I wrapped the rods up before starting the long walk round to the far margin to bait up. The first chance came early hours of the following morning. After wiping out my other 2 rods, I slid the net under the first fish of the session. An incredibly thick mist had settled over the mere by this point, so I popped the fish into the retainer to wait for the mist to clear before photographing a lovely mid-20 mirror against an epic backdrop an hour later. The next 24 hours remained uneventful, until after some heavy rain subsided, the middle rod was away. This turned out to be another of the mere's 18, an awesome fish known as Shadow Scale at 27.10. I felt like I was really getting to grips with the mere by this point and felt really in tune with what was going on, and I fished hard up until they spawned in early June. Nothing big came in those next couple of months, but I was catching consistently, and that was all that mattered. I felt like it was only a matter of time before the lake's big linear fell to my rods. Leaving them too for the next few weeks, I returned to the mere once more on the 11th of July. This was to mark the start of one long, unfortunate summer of angling. With the lake busy and all the swims on the end of a southwesterly taken, I opted to fish the pad swim at the opposite end. As the name suggests, the swim commands a huge bed of lilies covering probably half an acre at the shallow end of the lake, and it's an area where the fish feel comfortable, safe from the attention of anglers. With 72 hours at my disposal, I opted to sit it out and wait. My one and only chance came in the dying hours of the session. I hooked an incredibly powerful fish, which I simply couldn't control, and the unthinkable happened. The rod sprung back and the fish was gone. I retrieved the rig to find that my hook had straightened out, and I was devastated, knowing that I'd just lost something truly special. The next 2 months continued in similar fashion, and despite racking up a further 13 nights during the summer, I had nothing but another lost fish to show for my efforts. It was clear that the summer was a very difficult time on the Mere. The abundance of naturals present meant that it was very difficult to buy a bite during those warmer months, despite the fish being more active than ever. As the temperatures dropped into autumn and the naturals began to die off, I felt like this would be my best chance of one of my target fish. Early November came and the Mere had begun to produce fish once more. I dropped into the channel, and after finding a smooth area of silt for 2 rods and dispatching a scatter and a bait over the top, the 3rd rod was positioned on a spot that had done me a bite previously. After a quiet night, I was sat watching the water when the left-hand rod let out 2 beeps and then went into meltdown. With the camera lens steamed up in the damp air, I played what was clearly a good fish. It fought hard under the rod tips until after a bit of manoeuvring around the other lines, rolled into the net. We peered down and recognised it straight away. It's the big linear.
It is, it's a lovely linear.
With the rain still dancing, I dislodged the size 6 choddy from its bottom lip and slipped it into the sling to wait for a gap in the rain and to go and grab John Shoes Jones, who was fishing the swim next door, to come round to shoot some footage. At £30.12, it was another PB and one of my 3 targets ticked off the list. That turned out to be my last fish of the year and the perfect ending to my first full season on the Mere. I returned in early February to continue the search for my other 2 targets, a task which would go on to take me a further 3 years to accomplish. The first was a common known as Ivy, which at the time held a lake record, and an elusive mirror known as Bertha, which had only done 2 trips to the bank in the last 9 years. I made sure I was getting down to the Mere as often as I could to ensure that I was keeping in tune with what was going on, and in the 3 years that followed, I'd amassed countless hours and gradually began to work my way through the stock, catching some nice fish along the way. Strangely, although there was the odd better fish thrown in between, I seemed to be catching a lot of smaller fish, but I knew it was just a case of ploughing on until Bertha and Ivy made their mistake. During that time, I'd built up a very good knowledge of the Mere, and I knew where both targets were likely to come from and when. Although Bertha had only seen the bank twice in 9 years, both times it had been caught from the channel swim. Sadly, however, I received the news that in the June of 2018, Bertha had passed away after spawning. The news hit me hard. I'd put so much time and effort into catching that fish, and it left me in quite a dilemma. At the time, I did even consider pulling off the Mere altogether. But the thought of seeing Ivy resting in the bottom of the net kept the fire burning, and I ploughed on with my quest. Ivy was a fish that usually did 1 or 2 trips a year, but always from the same area of the lake, a marginal patrol route accessible from either the stumps or the boathouse. I'm pretty sure my chance came with Ivy in the October of 2016. With a full moon forecast, I'd headed out to try and prove the big moon, big common theory. After slipping the net under 2 fish in the first 24 hours, a mirror of just over 18 and a stunning ancient looking mid-double, I received the 3rd take in the early hours of the following morning. After guiding a heavy, powerful fish back towards the waiting net, after a series of surging runs along the near side margin, a big common surfaced. The fish suddenly turned and managed to wrap itself around some old sunken staging before the barbless hook slid out and the big common faded back into the depths of the Mere. I couldn't be completely sure, but I was almost certain that what I'd just lost was Ivy. 2 full years went by with me spending as much time as I could at the Mere, simply biding my time until my next chance came. I continued to catch consistently, banking a number of lovely fish along the way, and I knew it was once again just a case of working my way through the stock until Ivy once again made their mistake. I'd begun to pull off Blakemere during the summer months, concentrating my efforts instead on Wyreside, a campaign which I'll go on to explain in detail in the next part of this series, before returning to the mere around October time, when the temperatures would once again start to drop, the naturals would begin to die off, and the fish would once again be forced to search out anglers' baits. With a busy work life towards the end of the year, my final session of 2018 was going to be the 30th of November. I couldn't help thinking I was a bit too early for Ivy, with her not usually coming out until a little later into December, but I knew this was going to be my last chance that year. I distinctly remember texting a friend that evening saying, "My target common usually does a trip in December. I'm a bit early, but you never know." With that, I retired to bed thinking how crazy it would be if I could put it on the bank the following morning on the 1st of December. For some reason, pink fluoros had always singled out the commons for me. It had happened far too many times for it to be coincidence. So to maximise my chances, 3 pink NS1s were dispatched to the area that night. I was awoken around 6:30 AM by a huge drop back before the bobbin slammed back into the alarm and the rod hooped over. After a rather uneventful fight, I slipped what I thought was a low 20 common into the net. That was before I switched on the head torch and peered down. A huge frame common glared back at me. It was Ivy. After a few messages, the lads gathered round to witness the end of an era. I could finally hold up the one I dearly wanted and had worked so hard for, the immaculate Ivy.